it might happen. And if there are any questions, I will just start the voice of the other people, so not worry, I will just edit the recording track before putting online. Acknowledgements. This tutorial is an evolution of, well, a iterative evolution of collaborative efforts with a lot of other colleagues in the argumentation theory community. So a lot of thanks to a lot of people who contributed to the materials, ideas, discussions, and help overall. The first question that I want to address today is, why should we care about argumentation? Where all these come from? Why is this a good idea to look into? And my point is pretty simple, in the sense that argumentation is at the base of scientific inquiry, dialogues, most of the activities that we as humans or we as scientists do every day. So let's consider a simple question. And a simple question might be, well, very hot topic right now, can be, does MMR vaccination cause autism? Right? It's a true question, it's a reasonable question to pose ourselves, and it's one of those type of questions that scientists try to address every day. So you have a research hypothesis, and you try to figure out whether there are data backing up this hypothesis or not, right? So as any other scientist, the first thing that you might want to do is just look online and see what is that. And you find out that there is a paper, an early report that is written by a bunch of people, published on Lancet. And okay, it looks that it's addressing the same question. And you start reading the paper, and inside you can see what the findings. Let's see that there are some behavioral symptoms, i.e. autism, associated by the parents with measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination, etc. And they provide arguments, they provide a reason to believe this conclusion. And the reason is a bunch of data, especially the analysis of 12 patients, that show some correlation between a behavioral diagnosis of autism and an exposure to the MMR vaccination. To be fair, in the same paper, you can also read in the discussions whether, well, we are not exactly sure if this is an actual causal link. So the author of the paper actually said that we are not entirely sure this is a causation. And at the same time, they also say that there are potential other explanations. So in the same paper, you have a conclusion. We have some data backing up this conclusion. So we have some support here. And we also know that there are reasons that might give other explanation, or there are potential reasons not to believe the link between this data and this conclusion. Now, what they do in this paper is basically creating an argument in favor of the conclusion MMR vaccination causes autism. And in the argumentation community, we had people formalizing those argumentation schemes, so those patterns of reasoning that we are using every day in putting forward our conclusion and backing up those conclusions. And an argumentation scheme is nothing but basically a scheme that says there are some premises, if there are some conclusions. So in this case, you have that if an hypothesis is true, then a proposition reporting an event will be observed to be true. So if you observe B, then you have to conclude that A is the case. So this is basically what we are trying to do. When we have a research hypothesis, we say, well, if we have some data backing up this hypothesis, then the hypothesis. Right? But at the same time, Wharton and colleagues, they also propose what they are called critical questions that are even more important than the structure itself. The critical questions are allowing you to identify whether the argument is strong enough, or whether there are other arguments that might be important to be considered, or whether there is any way to strengthen or weaken the argument itself. So you can ask yourself, is it the case that if A is true, then B is true? Is there a causal link between the two of them? Could be there some reason why the data is true other than because of A being true? So there are alternative explanations for the same phenomenon. So the connection between critical questions are trying to help us to minimize our confirmation bias, our other bias related to be too much focused on a specific explanation, etc. So what you write in the paper matches very nicely what we already had from the philosophical area of our community that is very much interested in formalizing those reasoning patterns. But let's move on. So we started from the question, does MMR vaccination cause autism? We found a paper, that's fine. And then we go on and we find another paper, perhaps, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, a few years after the previous one. And actually, we can find that in this paper because it is citing the previous one. And we can look inside, and it's actually very much written in order to provide counter-arguments to the previous. In particular, the main conclusion of this paper says that there is no association between the age at the time of vaccination, the time since the vaccination, or the date of vaccination, and the development of autistic disorder. So the study provides strong evidence against the hypothesis that MMR vaccination causes autism. And they back up this statement, this conclusion, by an analysis of 500,000 children in the world. So this is, if you just read up this paper alone, you have just, okay, this is the conclusion, and this is backed up on this data. But now we can merge the information we have from these two different papers. So we can say, okay, the original paper will say there is a correlation between MMR vaccination and autism, backed up by an analysis of 12 children. The authors of this original paper consider the case that there were potential alternative explanations, and they also question themselves a little, say, well, we don't know whether there is an actual causal link. And this is actually the analysis that has been provided by the second paper that says, well, there is no causal link. So in some way, this potential critique to the original argument is well founded. We have counterexamples, plenty of counterexamples, strong evidence that this is the case. The question that we now have is how we can build a machinery in order to help us to derive some conclusions by a set of evidence, a set of arguments and counter-arguments. And that is the argumentation here. So, what we had here can be represented in forms of logical impairment and rules and evidence in a very almost straightforward way. So what I'm going to show you now is one of the simplest ways in the argumentation community created to formalize this evidence and links to the conclusion, and which is based on papers published in a special issue on the argumentation and computation journal, that is one of the main journals of reference for the community. And in this special issue, you can have a list of different approaches to structural implementation. I will just consider one of them right now, the one that I consider the simplest. And the one that I'm going to consider is based on deductive argumentation. So it's very much focused on a logical aspect behind reasoning on conclusion and evidence. So Philippe Bernard and Anthony Hunter proposed the idea, okay, if we start from a logical approach, we have some basic definition, like we have a language, we have to define a language for this logic, and we need a consequence relation, and we need a notion of complement, so whether a literal is a positive or a negative, and whether one is the negation of the other. So we have that if alpha is positive, then the negative is the complement, and vice versa. And given this definition, you can just say, okay, a deductive argument is a pair when we have some support and a complete. So you have the set phi, that is the set of propositions, or logical impact, logical formula, and then we have alpha that is entailed by phi. So we have this bit that is the premises of the argument, and alpha that is the conclusion of the argument. Otherwise, it can be called the support, and this one can be called the claim of an argument. So if we have we have a report that says rain, and we have an inference rule that says report rain implies carry umbrella, then this is an argument supporting the conclusion that we should carry an umbrella. You can use whatever logic you want, but for the sake of this tutorial, I will just focus on the simplest logic that they will consider, which is just considering the entailment, just whether you have a rule, an inference rule, and whether you have all the premises of this rule backed up in your knowledge base, or whether you can prove those premises in your argument. So if you have this knowledge base, A and B implies C, and C implies D, then you can derive both C and D, but you cannot derive either A or B, because there is no rule saying that having A or B as an input. So this is one of the simplest logics that you can think. Which means that, okay, given the definition I gave you before of a deductive argument, a deductive argument using simple logic is just an argument where you have some premises here, a conclusion that is derived. It can be entailed using the rule, the entailment rule that I just gave you in this slide before. So you have, if you have this in your knowledge base, then because you have this inference rule, and if you have this as part of your argument, then you can infer that it's a good investment to invest in the British Petroleum, given the fact that there is this inference rule oil company and it's a good performer, and you have this backed up in your knowledge base. Now, so far it's pretty straightforward. The question is how we can represent conflict among arguments. And in the case of the simple logic, we basically have two main types of conflict. The first one is when you have an undercut. So you have an argument providing a reason not to believe the premise of another argument. And rebut is when you have an argument putting forward a conclusion that is the opposite conclusion of an argument. So the undercut is attacking the premises of an argument. The rebut attacks the conclusion of an So you have, if we take these two simple examples, if you have efficient metro, if you have an efficient metro, you can use the metro, therefore you should use metro. And then you have that strike links to the not having an efficient metro, therefore the metro is not efficient. This contradicts the premise in the first argument. So this is a case of simple undercut, if you simply undercut a wall. Instead, if you have that you have government in deficit, and if you have a government in deficit, you should cut government spending, therefore you should cut government spending, and this argument A3. But if you have a weak economy, and weak economy implies you should not cut government spending, then you should not cut government spending. These two arguments are contradicting each other in the conclusion. So you have a simple rebut between the two. Note that in the first case, the attack is from one argument to the other. In the second case, the attack is controllable. So in this case, A2 simply undercut A1, but A1 has nothing to do with A2. In this case, A4 simply rebut A3, but also A3 simply rebut A4. Okay? So, given this simple definition, if we come back to our program before, we had this situation here. The question is how we can transform this equation here into a null space with some rules. Although it might seem trivial or simple or straightforward, there are people studying this problem since almost a decade, and there are different ways to address this issue. What I'm going to show you today, once again, is the simplest case. But this is also bringing issue, a much more wide issue, which is linked to how we do formalize things in logic, which is a philosophical topic per se that we are not going to touch today, but I'm pretty sure that each of us are really aware of the issue of moving a natural language statement into a logical statement. You have many ways to represent the same thing in a logical language. So the formalization that will happen in the next step is highly questionable. We all agree that there are infinite ways to represent the same situation. What I'm going to show you right now is not the perfect one, it's just one. Just because we don't have a measurement of perfection. So that is another issue. So we can start saying, okay, we have some data from the original paper or weight file. And unless we have alternative explanation, and assuming that we have a causal link, then the vaccination is the cause of autism, right? This was the main argument of the original paper. And we have this evidence because the original paper gave us a table with children and patients. In the original paper, they said we have no alternative explanation, and I forgot to add that they assumed that it was a causal link. And then we had that the second paper said, well, if we can prove that there is no association between these two situations, then we can disprove that it was a causal link. To get that there is no association with a larger study, and we got a large study. So the first argument, that is the argument of the first paper, it will say, of this A2 is the argument of the original paper. It says we have the table with all the information there. We have no alternative explanation. We also have a causal link, missed in this slide, apologies. And given the link, that's table, not alternative explanation, causal link implies the cause of the autism vaccination, then we can conclude that the vaccination is the cause for autism. And then we have instead the second paper that comes in and said, well, we have a large study, The large study says that there is no association. The not association implies not causal link, which means that there is no causal link. And if you remember the definition we had before, we had that this simply undercut the second argument, because it's providing a reason not to believe one of the premises of the second argument. Yes,
You have mentioned that it's not a causal link, but why is it not a vaccination cause? Why can't we have that extension in the A1? So that vaccination is not a cause of it. So is A1 undercuts A2 in just the causal link. So why not the final conclusion? Is it just the way you have found it, or could it be done?
So your colleague, our colleague, is saying, is it this an attack against the conclusion, or is this part an attack of a part of the argument? Yes, this is the question. You just anticipated. You could have waited 2 slides, that's fine, but it is a very interesting question. So the question is, what does mean having an attack between the argument M1 against the argument H2, right? The approach that we are taking in argumentation theory is, if you have an attack from A1 against A2, A2 doesn't exist anymore. Because A2 is supported, the conclusion of A2 is supported only all the premises. If you manage to falsify one of them, you falsify the entire. Which means that if you have this situation, you have A1 undercutting A2, and until you can provide a reason not to believe A1, or an alternative explanation for A2 that doesn't consider this causal link proposition, then you can never reinstate the conclusion that there is a causal link. Does it make sense? Yeah. Right. So why I would say that you just anticipated this question is because if you start moving from this representation, you can see that now you can start seeing argument as an atomic element. We stop looking inside a single proposition inside an argument, and we just say, okay, what is the acceptability status of a single argument? Once we have an acceptability status of an argument, whether an argument is acceptable, makes sense or not, then we can go back and look at the single proposition inside that argument and see which of those propositions is. Which means that if we have that argument A2 is reasonable, why means that we should look inside the propositions of the argument A2 and see, okay, vaccination is the cause. But if you actually have reason not to believe the argument A2 as a whole, then we can disregard at least the conclusion inside the argument. Which means that we can abstract from what is inside, and we can just look at the relationship between arguments, and the relationship between those arguments will be based on the notion of attacks or conflict. In particular, the simple rebut and the simple undercut we showed you before, but there are many others. Which means that the acceptability status of an argument, if we start looking at an argument as a single atomic unit, does depend on the acceptability status of the other arguments as atomic units and the relation of conflict among them. And this is the intuition behind one of the most cited paper in artificial intelligence, that is on the acceptability of arguments in fundamental role in reasoning logic programming, the N-person games or Common, which introduced the concept of abstract argumentation, which is exactly what I described before. An argument is an atomic element, and those atomic elements of argument are linked to each other through the notion of conflict. So an abstract argumentation framework is a set of arguments and attacks among them. That is. So we started from, okay, argumentation schemes, we started from logical proposition, we start from a lot of information, and we summarize everything into arguments and adults. But this is actual pretty useful and interesting and powerful definition when you associate that with additional notion. And the additional notion is the notion of semantics, or the notion of how we can identify arguments that survive the conflict together. How we can identify the arguments that all together are acceptable, make sense to us. And the good thing is, or the bad thing is, there are many things. So you can have different ways to identify which arguments are altogether acceptable. And there are many ways to represent it. The way I'm going to illustrate you is not the original definition of communism, but is through the re-elaboration of Peter Baroni and Massimiliano Comini almost 10 years after, more than 10 years after the original paper. And what they did is they tried to identify what are the principles behind those criteria for identifying different set of arguments as acceptable. So one of the principles that you might want to satisfy is the conflict freeness. So if you have an argument A attacking argument B, you cannot accept the two of them altogether. Either you accept one or you accept the other, but not both. So this is the idea of conflict freeness. You might want to have the idea of admissibility, that is, or defense, which means that if you have argument A attacking B, B attacking C, A defends C against the attack from B. So you want to have, more or less, that A and C should be together in start. Or at least, if you want to accept C, then you have to accept A, and if you accept A, it makes sense also to accept C. And this brings also to strong admissibility, which means, sorry, this is another mistake. It says that if an argument doesn't receive an attack, it must be acceptable. So that is almost straightforward definition. Restatement, if you are defending somebody, then you should bring it inside. You should be generous. You should consider the possibility to collect all together everybody you defend. Not just one of them, but all. Maximality, if you have a set of arguments and another set of arguments that satisfy the same principles, but it's just bigger, it is subset maximal, then you might want to consider the maximal one instead of just one. And then directionality, I want to say that well, this acceptability status of an argument depends only on the attacks it receives, not other weird condition somewhere in the network you are considering. First of all, those are just properties, principles, that you might want to just pick some of them and use some of them to combine in your semantics. Which is, by the way, a piece of work that some colleagues in France are doing right now. So you can actually construct your own semantics in the way you actually want. What I'm going to show right now is just the original semantics of tone, but just from the point of view of those principles. So let's consider this is a Doom segmentation graph. Each node is an argument, and then the arrows are tags. And let's start considering the complete extension. Complete extensions are set of arguments. So an extension is a set of arguments that satisfy some property, some criteria. And the criteria that the complete extension satisfy are admissibility and a free statement, which means that there are a set of conflict-free arguments such that each dependent argument is together in the extension. So how you can compute this equation? Well, you start perhaps from those that are unattacked, right? So A, C, E, and G are unattacked. Then you look at of the other arguments, which one is dependent? So for instance, G and B, are attacked, both of them are attacked by H. But if you take inside G is defending both of them against H. So if you take this one and if you can find out which one is another conflict-free set inside this weird situation here, then you can identify another argument, perhaps B, that is dependent against G. So what you can see is, okay, A, C, E, and G do not need anything, so they are always an element of the complete extensions. Among the others, you have to look at which one are defended by those arguments. And you can just have a look at those three here. But all the three are in a weird situation where D and B are rebutting each other, B and F are rebutting each other, and F and D are rebutting each other. So basically, each of them attacks the other and defends themselves. So you basically start taking one or the other independently. You cannot take F, because F is in any case undercut by either E or C. So F is out always. But so it means that it is either D or B. And then you have these two situations, D and E. The ground extension satisfies the grounded semantics, and so the grounded semantics requires strong admissibility, which is basically taking which are the minimum complete extension. What is the most skeptical view of your doomed documentation group? What is beyond doubt? Right now, what is beyond doubt is A, C, E, and G. They are not attacked. There is no reason not to believe them. Preferred extension instead are trying to maximize the set of arguments you can bring inside. This might leave area for uncertainty. So you don't know which one is the right one, let's say so, because you can have multiple extensions. But each extension is a complete extension and is a maximum. Okay? And then you can have a stable extension that says, well, you have to identify something that attacks everything else. So if you cannot identify a set of arguments that attacks everything that is outside this set, then this is a stable extension. There is no way you can change the settability status of anything because it's covering all the argumentation framework. And in this case, it corresponds to the preferred extension in this situation, but not necessarily. Actually, the stable extension is one of the few semantics that might not exist. Because in the case you have a self-defeating argument, so if you just have a simple framework that is A attacking itself, and in DOM it's possible to have it, and you have just this simple example, A attacking itself, there is no way to identify a conflict-free set that attacks everything else. Because the only set of arguments there is A, but A is not conflict. Or if you have the empty framework, then by definition you cannot have any sets.
In this one, why is H not a stable extension? A, C, E, G, H.
Because A, C, E, and G, you said this one.
H. So you have B as an extension. That's because H is a minor argument. And I meant that why isn't H included?
H is
yeah. Okay. And then because it's not defending itself, it's not a
Because definitely you definitely need to have complete fitness. You need complete fitness in that. And all of those definitions that I just provided before are connected all together in the notion of complete extension. So a stable extension is also a complete extension. A preferred extension is also a complete extension. A preferred extension is also a complete extension. And that, once again, you have to split a slide that is coming here, which means that there is another way to look at a framework. It's not just by extension, so set of arguments, but as a labeling. So identifying a label to assign to each argument that can be either in, out, or undecided. So an argument is labeled in if it belongs to an extension, out if it is attacked by an argument that belongs to an extension. Undecided is the case where you don't know. And it's exactly the case where you have a self-defeating argument. It cannot be in, it cannot be out, which means that it's just undecided. So, given this notion of labeling, where you have this, a labeling is a set of, a mapping between a set of arguments to a set of labels. You can rename all the semantics I showed you before in terms of labelings. So you can say that the grounded labeling is the one that maximizes the undecided. So let's consider the ground example before. The ground was A, C, E, and G because it was the minimum complete one. And if you look at all the others, it's not clear to identify which one might be in or out because, well, okay, F and H are out because G and E are in, that's fine. But among B and D, their defense is not grounded in G or E or C or A. They are defending themselves, which may be that you have basically three options. I don't know, which is the case of undecided. One is in, or the other is in, which are the case of the two preferred extensions, which indeed the maximum, the case where the labelings maximize the set of in argument are the preferred extensions. So one is when A is in, and the other one is when B is in. And the case of the stable is when you have no undecided whatsoever. And in this case, it coincides with the preferred extension. Yes?
Terms, the definitions of in and out and undecided.
An argument is defined as in if all its attackers are out. An argument is defined as out if at least one of its attackers are in, and otherwise undecided.
What does this depend on? Depends on a given extension. I mean, it's a property of the graph, it's a property of an extension of a graph. You said an argument is in, or it's out. Okay. Which is great.
Once again, you anticipated five slides. So let's take this graph, and I just do it step by step because it was what I wanted to do with others. So in this graph, we want to identify what are the complete labellings. So the labellings that identify what are the possible alternatives of arguments that are in, out, and so. So I look at this graph and I always start from the arguments that are unattacked. So let's say these arguments A here. The definition that are behind the labelings are an argument is in if all its attackers are out. Now, if an argument has no attackers, this is true by true, right? So A can label only in. There is no alternative for this. Now, the definition of an argument is labeled out if at least one of its attackers is labeled in. Which means that I look at this one, this is labeled in always. There is no is beyond that. B, E, and I can be only labeled out because one of its attackers is in always. which brings us, okay, let's take C, once again, C as only one attacker, that is labeled out, and in this case, it's all these attackers are labeled out, which means that C is in. D becomes out, but if D becomes out, then the question is what happened with the rest of the graph. So what you, and honestly, I really hope there was whiteboard here. So that's what it is. I really don't know. So what I did so far, it was basically, let me start doing it with this one. The arguments that are on attack are in, by definition, all the attackers are out. G attacks H, so H is out. E attacks F, so F is out. Now the question is what happened with these two, okay? This two, the question is, are all if their attackers out? So let's consider D. Are all the attackers of D out in this case? From what I start building right now. So for what I start building right now labels only those arguments here, right? So I have a label for A, C, E, G, H, and F. These two are out. These four are in. But I have no information about B. And B is an attacker of D. So given the label that I'm building right now, I cannot say D is in, because I don't know whether all its attackers are out. And at this point I have to make a choice. So either I try to make one of them in, or I can say I abstain. And this means that it is undecided. Which means that when you're building a library, you start from the attack, that's fine. But you might reach a point where you have to make a choice. You might say, I abstain from the choice, which means that everything else that is not beyond doubt is undecided, which is this case. So I start making the labelings here, A, C, E, and G, H, and F. This is beyond doubt. Everything else just becomes undecided. And if I put this undecided, this becomes undecided by definition. Because all these attackers are not out, and none of these attackers are out. But at this point, I can make a choice between D and B. I can just say, okay, let's put D in. So, can I put D in? Well, if I put D in, B is out, because there is an attacker that is in. And this D in is supported, because all its attackers right now are out. Right? But there is the symmetric case. So I can start saying, okay, B is in. And if B is in, D is out. And the fact that I made this choice B as in is reasonable because now all its attackers are out. Does this address?
Yeah, so I mean, if I understand correctly, you're saying that labeling the fixed points of these two operations, yes, the ones that describe in and out, you can have many fixed points.
Yes. So the other way you can represent it, you have an acceptability function and the complete extensions are the fixed points. Yes. Other questions? Right. So we illustrated the case of complete, grounded, preferred, and stable extension and semantics. And you can see that all of them satisfy the conflict freeness. All of them satisfy the admissibility. And all of them satisfy the limit statement, which is actually showing us that there is a connection between all the three of them. And the one that satisfies, the one that is actually built on this way is the complete one. Which means that complete, grounded, preferred, and stable are all cases of complete extensions. So the case of the complete extension is actually the fixed point. And then you can have the minimum fixed point, that is the grounded, or the minimum extension, the minimum complete extension is the grounded. And then you have the maximum one of the preferred, And the stable one for a special case where you don't have undecided, where you don't have the possibility to have undecided outlets. Which means that, for instance, preferred, grounded, and stable satisfy maximality, which means that there is no, it is impossible to have two preferred extensions, one a superset of the other, but it is very much possible to have two complete extensions, one a superset of the other, which is actually the case. For instance, the grounded extension is always included in all the other complete extensions. The grounded is the only one satisfied with strong Cerutti that says that your defense must be grounded only on undecided argument, which means that at some point you will ended up to have undecided arguments potentially, because some of them you have to put one of them in or one of them out, but it's not take over from moving from the unattacked argument onward. And the stable doesn't satisfy the directionality, which means because it requires maximum maximality among the graph. So you have to say, to identify a set of arguments that attacks all the others. And that breaks the direction. In terms of complexity, identify those decision problems on those argumentation graphs are pretty difficult for most of the semantics. The only one that we all love is programming semantics because it's polynomial. So we have those problems are given a semantics sigma, whether a set of whether this semantics brings us at least one extension, a set of arguments. So whether there exists an extension of arguments to satisfy these semantics, and this is trivial for complete grounded preferred, but not for stable. For stable, you have to actually do things in order to identify whether the semantics gives us an extension or not. While for complete grounded preferred is trivial because the empty set is always trivially potentially a complete extension. So at least the empty set always exists. Federico's acceptance. Federico's acceptance means, okay, given a semantics gives you potentially a set of extensions, okay? Whether an argument exists in at least one of those extensions. This is defined as Federico's acceptance of an argument. So whether there is at least one extension in which the argument belongs. And this is can be complete for complete and preferred, polynomial for grounded, and be complete for stable as well. So basically you have to identify a set that is an extension that satisfies those requirements in which the argument belongs. Skeptical acceptance, it is this case, is the case where an argument belongs to all the extensions. So an argument is skeptically accepted regarding semantics if and only if that argument belongs to all the extensions identified by that semantic. And in this case, it's pretty interesting to see that for the case of preferred, which is I think the case that you will focus mostly later on, is at the second level of polynomial theory. So it's 5. Then, given a set of arguments, whether you want to verify whether that set of arguments is an extension of a semantics. So you want to verify that, and apart from preferred, is polynomial for the others. And the last one is to identify a non-empty set that is an extension for that semantics, and apart from the grounded is empty complete. We already touched on this exercise, but it's fine. What I wanted to show you before was, in particular, to look at a graph like this one, the way I would approach as a human being would be I start from the unattacked argument and I will build from that. And as a human, it's pretty easy to identify what are the unattacked arguments. So A is the only one unattacked. For now, let's ignore this bit, because we will come there in a second. And if this is unattacked, this is in. The attacked arguments are out. This brings us this as in. But if we start looking at this one, this is out, but we cannot know anything about this one because it can be either in or out. It's the case we identified before. So if we bring this in, then this means that this is out. And if this is out, this was already out because we saw it before, which means once again we don't know about this still, and once again it's another choice we want to make. So this in, out, which means that M is unattacked right now. In, out, so even this case is another case where we have to make a judgment, try to put one in or the other in. So this situation might become, you can see why this becomes exponential and it's difficult to address compute all the extensions. And for instance, if you want the preferred, you naively might want to compute all the complete first, all the fixed points, and then maximize it. So once again, that's why it's at the second level. But what I want to show you here is, if we look at this case here, of NOP, from a directionality point of view, this bit attacks this other bit. So you can look at this bit separately, let's say so, and try, because you want to propagate things like in this way. So if you look at this bit, you can start saying, okay, let's put this in. If this is in, this becomes out. If this is out, this should become in, right? But if this is in, then this is out. So every time you have an odd circle, which can be either a self-defeating one or anything that is an odd number, then it's always undecided, unless there is something that can break the cycle. Okay? The other bit that I wanted to show you from this example is, intuitively, I identify this one as a separate component. I said to you, because this attacks this one, if I can understand what is happening in this bit here, then I can propagate the effect on the others, right? And this is the idea behind decomposing a graph and try to identify areas of a graph that you can compute the labellings, the sub-labellings on a subset, and then propagate what you compute to the other bit of the graph in order to, for instance, reduce the complexity of computing, the computational effort of computing some of the extensions or some of the decision problems. And this is the topic of a paper we wrote some years ago with a lot of other colleagues. And the paper is very interesting. I suggest you all to read it. It's a lovely 50 pages mathematical proofs. But the idea that we try to address there is basically, can we partition a graph in order that we can compute labellings on the sub-graphs and then merge all together? If you can do it, then it's making much simpler computing situations, solving these problems. And we start from some definitions. So we defined semantics as fully decomposable, whether we can find a way to compute all the extensions on all the components below, and then merge them together to get the labellings on the entire graph. So we find, given an arbitrary partition on the graph, whether we can compute things on the local partitions and then merge back on top. If we cannot get full decomposability, then at least we can have top-down decomposability. So if we combine local labellings, you get at least all the global labellings, potentially more. So some of them are not considering all the constraints linked to the other labels. And then the bottom-up decomposability is whether we, if we combine all the local labellings on the subgraphs, whether we can get only global labellings, potentially some less. So we are missing some bits. The interesting bit is complete and stable are fully decomposability. That's fine, that's great. But all of them, at least complete, stable, grounded, preferred, are top-down decomposability. Which means that if you can find a way to partition your graph in an intelligent way, you can play and propagate those constraints in order to compute all the labelings on the entire graph by just starting from this board bit. And this is something that Mauro will touch base later on, because the only case that has been identified so far in the literature for actually doing that and finding all the labelings, global labelings, is to start from the strongly connected components. You identify the strongly connected components in the graph. Given the fact that you have the strongly connected components in the graph, you can have an order in these strongly connected components, which means that you can start from those strongly connected components that are unattacked. And if you proceed from this one and explore all the strongly connected components, then it's guaranteed that you identify all the global labels. If you are instead starting from an arbitrary partition, you might find more global labels than those that are actually deliverable. And this is one of the cases that has been explored in practice for building solvers. Now, the theory behind Doom is even bigger, and it's 20 more years that people are just studying properties. There are plenty of other properties that I'm not going to mention today, because the idea of the tutorial is to move in the idea of using argumentation, not just studying all the properties of argumentation frameworks. So, if you remember, we start from a concrete example, a concrete problem, whether our vaccination was sorted. And we build those arguments, and now we have all the nice properties to identify whether arguments can be accepted or rejected, and then you can come back and see whether these arguments are brings to believe some of the position that we had at the beginning. Okay, but concretely, there are very few examples that actually implemented the entire, let's say, pipeline. Let's say start from a sort of knowledge base, compute everything, compute all the extensions, come back, and even less examples of real-world applications. So what I'm going to show you in the next half an hour or a little more is about real-world application on argumentation. The first one is from where everything started in terms of real-world application was a paper published not so long ago. Well, they start saying, okay, first of all, if you want to have anything real, you need a database, which is pretty surprising for most of the people in my community. And they start saying, okay, let's create a database of the argumentative structure we want to have. And they formalize the argumentative structures we need in terms of for building arguments, for building extensions, etc. So we need to have an inference. We need to have a conflict. We might want to have preferences. Preferences is a big chapter I'm not going to touch base today. but there are plenty of works on preferences in the community. Inference, conflict, preference refer to information in general, proposition, or anything else. And those inference, conflicts, etc., might refer to some generic scheme, like the argumentation scheme I mentioned before, the general approach that says, if you want to prove that an hypothesis is true, you have to back up with some data. These kind of things are general rule of inference. So in this way, you can have, they actually create the first ontology for representing all the structure, all the piece of information you need to build arguments, and after that, extensions. So especially the information related to the conflict are pretty important. It's been implemented. It is out there. It's the argument interextended format, and they actually use it. So to prove that all of these actually makes sense, is they actually did it and they implement it in a database. That's fine, and then they had to build an interface to start populating it. So what they did is they did a touch screen that was in 2006, I think, and it was a touch screen. I think is 6 or 7 feet wide and 2 feet or 3 feet tall. And they wanted to analyze live an episode of the BBC Moral Maze. BBC Moral Maze is a radio program where different participants interact on potentially controversial issues, and they put forward arguments and counter-arguments. And they wanted to create argumentative structures, so identify what are the claims, premises, links, conflicts, etc., real time. And that's why it was necessary to have a big touch screen, because they needed collaborative effort. So I'm going to show you a video where you can see the BBC Moral Maze in the background. You probably will not see, but there was a professional typer who was typing sentences, cut them, send them to the touch screen, and then you will see people in the touch screen making links. So this piece of information is an inference link with this inference to get this conclusion, and these two pieces of information are conflicting with each other. Etc. So, hoping it works.
The High Court this week, not the Empire.
Unfortunately, the touch screen was retro-projected, and it was built with infrared technology, so they had to work in the darkness to make it work. So that's why it's very dark in the video.
That at its height controlled 3/4 of the planet and ruled over 1/4 of its people, but the empire that had lost its power and its purpose in 2 world wars was struggling against the burgeoning nationalism of its subjects and would soon give it all up in a headlong rush to decom. The panel: Melanie Phillips, social commentator on the Daily Mail; Anne McElvoy, public policy editor of The Economist; the Catholic writer Clifford Longley; and Matthew Taylor, formerly Tony Blair's chief political advisor, now chief executive of the RSA. Melanie, these poor people may get damages, but is historical justice being served?
Well, I think it's very important to bring to justice the actual perpetrators of atrocities or war crimes, but I think it's a very different matter if courts are being used, as I think they are in this case, as a kind of propaganda exercise against colonialism.
I think there's a danger of using history as a political football, or crudely ascribing today's problems to long past events, but I also believe that those who suffered oppression have the right to a hearing and a relevant compensation, and also that if we fail to learn from the mistakes of the past, we're more likely to repeat them.
Anne McElvoy?
Well, might well be a right to compensation in this case, where the evidence is pretty clear, but I think in general we attempt to deal with the colonial period through the judiciary system isn't a right together. It tends to be then responses and versions of the present rather than the clarity about the past.
Because I don't see any wrong with doing the right thing, even though it's extremely late in the day. But nevertheless, an injustice was committed and it can be corrected, and therefore should be. The broader question of whether this should become a kind of symbolic moment.
Which means that if you are traveling in Scotland and you are in Dundee, just apply and ask them to play with the touch screen is still there, if you want to play. It's off sync right now, but we're not using it anymore. It's pretty interesting to use. So this was probably the first, one of the very good first examples of using argumentation theory in order to analyze live a radio program, or doing something that was just beyond having a knowledge base, computing everything, and coming back. It was something more sort of real world. And it was very interesting, very successful, and now the touch screen is collecting those. Unless you have another situation of this one is not very popular. So what we did in another research published in AMAS a couple of years ago and funded by the Army Research Lab in the United States and the Ministry of Defense in the UK was the same idea behind that argument wall, but put in a computer and in a way to support intelligence analysts in their sense making. So an intelligence analyst, when is trying to address what is happening in the situation, is doing exactly what we as scientists do every day. Construct research hypotheses, identify whether this hypothesis is backed up by data, if not, move to another one. And at the end, try to figure out which is the most reasonable, acceptable hypothesis altogether. So, let's consider a slightly, because the case of the vaccination is pretty simple, let's consider a slightly different problem, which might be evaluate the Russian intervention in Syria. And the research hypothesis is the Russian intervention in Syria humanitarian or strategic? So you have these two potential different hypotheses. We'll not go into the how to gather data. For the purpose of this example, we just use the internet, but you might have other sources of information, but that is outside the scope of this presentation. But the idea is whether you can justify those possible hypotheses with the data you get, with some plausible reason. So we built this system that has a graphical user interface, it's fine. That has a system that is called sense making agent, is exactly implementing what I described to you before. So from boxes representing information and links among those boxes might be representing inferences or conflicts or everything else, builds a propositional knowledge base, builds arguments out of the propositional knowledge base, computes semantics extension out of those arguments, and come back and identify which propositions in the knowledge base are acceptable based on whether they are belonging to an argument is acceptable or not, and then move it back to the graphical user interface. They are also doing things with crowdsourcing and provenance. We are not going there today, but more than happy to have a chat if you want after. And the other bit that we're not going to go there today, it was collaborative. So you can actually have these analysis moving on different screens, on different computers, on different networks, with a potential, what we call information firewall, because working with the militaries, they had to enforce some rules of what to share with whom to share with. Once again, we will not go there today. So we built once again on top of argumentation schemes. They seem to be pretty reasonable and pretty sensible for what we want to do. One of them is what I showed you at the very beginning of the presentation about proving hypotheses backed up with data. We also use other schemes like cause to effect. So if you want to see whether something is the cause of something else, you basically try to start from, okay, if A occurs, then B might occur. And if you have that A occurs, then you want to conclude that B might also occur. But you want also to criticize this potential reasoning system by saying whether how strong is the causal generalization, whether you have enough evidence supporting that A occurs, or maybe it's not strong enough, that evidence, whether there are other causal factors that might link or have some impact on this connection between A and B. So, in the case of the Russian intervention, we can say, okay, we can have two hypotheses here. One of them is the Russian intervention in Syria is humanitarian. The other one is Russian intervention in Syria aims at protecting strategic assets. And we start saying, we as human, or we as an analyst can say, these two cannot accept together. So we can say, okay, one is completely from another. These two boxes are completely each other. And you can start identify whether there are elements of supporting one or another. So you can say, well, Russian troops deliver aids to residents in Kanyana in Syria, and there was a YouTube video showing this. So that might support the claim of Russian intervention in Syria is humanitarian. In that case, you have that there was an agreement to exchange crude oil for refined petroleum between Russia and Syria. So it might be an argument, or might be a reason for believing that the intervention of Russia in Syria was more for protecting strategic assets. And then you can go on, and you can perhaps build in some argument from cause to effect. So you can say, well, we know that there were civilian casualties caused by Russian forces, and that might undermine the fact that the Russian intervention in Syria is humanitarian. And this might be the conclusion of a cause to effect. And the cause may be, well, there's been a large use of Soviet techniques in Syria, and the link between cause and effect is, if you're using Soviet doctrine, you might end up with civilian casualties. So you can have this argumentation scheme. And what we did in the CH cases is not just allowing drawing these graphs, it's fine. But because you say this is an instantiation of an argumentation scheme, we know which are the critical questions. Because the critical questions are written in stone here, or we can come out with our question. So this is not a doomed argumentation. This is an intuitive graph that's similar to what I showed you at the very beginning of the presentation. Right? You have, this is the conclusion. This might be a positive link towards this one. This might be a negative link between them. And from this graph, you can identify a propositional knowledge base, and from the propositional knowledge base, you can identify arguments. Once again, you anticipated the previous slides. So it means that I should probably prepare my presentation on the opposite side. Those are not arguments. Those are, and think about those purple boxes as propositions. And this link is, this implies this. And this, if you have a link that is just a row, you have a generic link, a generic row. If you have a link that is labeled, and I was coming to the label in a second, with, for instance, this means link of cause to effect, then you're saying that these altogether represents a case of an instance of this generic scheme from cause to effect. Because we can have that this is the conclusion, that's fine. But then we have that the argument from cause to effect required if A occurs, then B might occur. and we had to write down this in the scheme. And that was use of old Soviet doctrine causes civilian casualties, is the link between A and B. And then we have to identify, in this case, A occurs. And in this case, we have evidence say that there are large use of Soviet techniques in Syria. But the other bit is we have those critical questions that can be used to strengthen or weaken an argument based on this argumentation scheme. And what we implement in CA spaces is the ability to ask those questions. So the analyst put forward this argument, but automatically the system will say, well, are you sure this is the case? Do you actually have strong evidence that there has been large use of Soviet techniques in Syria? And the system automatically creates a negative answer. So the system says, I'm not convinced this is the case. Now, if you think in terms of what I described to you from this model, there is no way you can make this acceptable unless you criticize this counter-argument. There is no way you can have this in sort of, and so have the entire argument acceptable, unless you have this undercut made inefficient. So you need something to defend your position. And you can go on and say, well, I actually had evidence that there's been massive aerial and artillery strikes, and that was one of the cases of old Soviet doctrine. So if we have all of this, we can move from having all those powerful boxes as single proposition. We do not look inside the text. We are not doing natural language processing. So each box becomes a single proposition. The links, the green links becomes rules, and the red links becomes negations or elements of conflict among those propositions. Because we started this work before the paper describing the simple logic case was published, we use a different approach for instantiating this knowledge base and that way for building arguments. Which, for the sake of today's tutorial, is essentially the same approach. So we start saying we have all these pieces of information here becomes proposition. So, for instance, we have that the Russian delivered aid, that there was an oil agreement, that what was the doctrine, the Soviet doctrine, whether we had evidence of use of large Soviet doctrines there or not, and then we have, for instance, the fact that we have information about artillery usage, and then we have the rules that says, well, if we deliver aid, then it's a humanitarian intervention. If we want to protect our own interest, then it's a strategic intervention. And this is the implementation of the cause to link, cause to effect link. So if we have that the Soviet doctrine links to civilian casualties, and we know that we use techniques coming from the Soviet doctrine, then we will end up having casualties. And then we have that is either humanitarian or strategic. Forget about, sorry, the notation is a little cumbersome, but here means that humanitarian is the negation of strategic and vice versa. But instead that casualties negates is a direct undercut to humanitarian, and no evidence is an undercut to technique, and artillery is an undercut to no evidence. The point is, we build the knowledge base, we build argument. At this point, this is a doomed argumentation graph. So in here we have the true argument in terms of doom. And at this point we can compute perhaps preferred extensions or anything else. In this case, everything collapses into the ground extension. So there is a single extension here that is complete, grounded, preferred, and stable. It's a single fixed point. And from the Doom argumentation graph, we can come back and identify which bit of the original or the original analysis are justified, or so whether there are conclusions are accepted or not. Now, as I said, CA spaces is much bigger, and among the other things that we did is in this bit here. It was looking inside where the information comes. That was one of the main things.
Have you analyzed the same graph about the linearity of that condition?
I'm pretty sure it's going to be
somewhere.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be this. There were no political biases here. That was the only example we did, but apologies. It is being obtained by the UK and US government. There were no hidden meaning of it.
Who based it?
The decade, and they did the rest. So this is, to be fair, is the software itself is unbiased. So there is no code written. There is no piece of code in the written says if we talk about Russia or China or anything else, then something like that. It's not like this.
The computer will explode.
Yes. And it's going to be delivered open source in a few months' time, potentially with a web interface. But the other thing that I want to mention here is two things. One is reasoning about the information comes in is very important and interesting. So behind a piece of information that says X happened, you have the provenance of that piece of information. So you have where that piece of information comes from. It might come from informants, it might come from the internet, it might come from a newspaper, it can come from a lot of things, or maybe even modified in the ways it comes to you. So you can, somebody writes something and did a bit of analysis and then integrate it with something else. So identifying the way a piece of information reached you is extremely important and extremely interesting. And you might want to reason about that. So what we did is, for instance, create argumentation schemes exactly for reasoning about, do you have enough evidence or do you trust enough pieces of information, these kind of things, that might lead you to preferences for one evidence or against another evidence. The other thing that I want to mention is this system is not used, that I'm aware of, is not used in real world scenarios, but both the US and the UK identify it as very useful for training. So the purpose is not to create the best analysis or whatever, but is to support the training of new generation of analysts. Because when we think about analysts, we might think about 007 or whatever else. The reality is that they are 18 years old kids just getting out from high school with no logical background, with no mathematical background, and they need to be trained in one way or another. So what the US and the UK identified as a great value for this tool is actually for education, and as part of further research we want to do similar things with UK students. We have no information for that. The only thing that we know for sure is that it's going to be useful.
But do you think it's not detailed enough? It doesn't capture everything that
is the I mean the theory is sound. The problem is in the sense that we run some evaluation with some people sitting in front of a computer in a very nice, comfortable room with all the time we needed, and it was a couple of hours. The reality is it's managed more under pressure and deliver potential answer in a very short time, which means that dragging a box, filling a box, think about the box, etc., might not be what is happening is, if you are trained enough, and as a scientist we all are trained, sometimes we already know, almost unconsciously, whether we have enough information to back up our conclusion or not, or whether we explore all the reasonable critical questions. We don't need a computer to say, did you consider development? I already considered it. In my mind, I already considered it. So you apply heuristics to say, I already consider some pieces in your mind. And we didn't implement heuristics in this system. Yes?
So, has there been any validation or comparison with how humans would, let's say, build an extension or decide if a particular argument is supported? And you say that the theory is sound, that mathematically, logically, sure, but I mean, how does it, to follow up, how does it compare to how an individual, a human, would decide if a given argument, set of arguments is acceptable?
And you understood the thing that is going to be at the end of the tutorial, so if you want the answer now, you want to wait. Is we have some preliminary results. The short answer is we have preliminary results, but it's one of the so identify which is the semantic makes more sense, which are the construction makes more sense in the think type of order. I'm going to show you some results in a minute.
Similar question. So, how can we avoid biases in terms of even framing the argumentation itself? So, you have a person who believes violence is good, in some situations might be good, or so.
Is a huge question. How to move from natural language statement into a logical statement that is capturing everything, is unbiased, but we as I think that as a scientific community we don't. There are some techniques, and once again are techniques that say, did you consider those other alternatives? There are other techniques that are trying to minimizing the superimposition of your cultural aspects when you are formalizing, and that is what every person analysis is trained in doing that. But those things are, to my knowledge, is not very easy to create a computational machinery to implement that. Because first of all, you have to formalize what is your cultural background and how this will affect you an overall problem. So the short answer is, these are really interesting questions that should be addressed in many PhD theses. Any further questions before the copy? Yes.
In our presentation, we have the arguments are certain. There is no evaluation of the veracity of the argument. So, is there any words about something evaluation?
So, are you asking whether we have sort of probabilistic evaluation of the certainty or degree of belief? So, our colleague is asking whether there are approaches to identify whether an argument is strong enough or stronger than something else, or whether we have a measurement of the uncertainty of that argument. The answer is we have plenty of approaches. I didn't introduce it in this tutorial. Happy to give you references. And some of them are based on probabilistic reasoning, some of them are based on belief revision, some of them are based on preferences. The mostly used are preferences, so the idea is whether a bit of information is more preferred than another. But there are other approaches that are trying to build on top of trust, who probably is something phenomenal. Yes.
Do we think argumentation graphs are an event? Infinite argumentation graphs.
Infinite argumentation graphs. Yes. So we did a bit of work, what in the
Do they occur?
do they occur? In the reality, there is a very nice paper I co-author about infinite argumentation graphs. I'm happy to talk about that. We find out some weird situations where something might happen, but it's just a theoretical example. So it might happen in the case where you have different sensors giving you different lectures in a room, and that might lead to a cycle. And because you are taking consideration of the time, that might generate an infinite information. But it's very unlikely.
So here, argumentation graph using attack relation. Is the support relation important as well?
So there are two ways, yes. The question is whether a support relation is also used in relation to an attack relation. There are two ways support relation play a role in argumentation theory in general. One of them is what I described in this tutorial, that is inside out. So you have proposition linked together to support a conclusion. There is another area of research in argumentation theory that creates support relation among arguments themselves at the level of abstract argumentation. So in terms of given a Doom's graph, instead of having just one relation among arguments, you might have also other relations like a support relation or a material necessary relation, so an argument is necessary for another one, or a sub-argument relation. So there are being extensions to those in order to consider those notions, and that might reflect, well, often reflects into semantics, not how to evaluate the system. It's I had to make many choices in this tutorial. So, the good thing is it's coming out the first handbook of formal argumentation. So if you are very interested, there are going to be around 1,000 pages of things to read. But if you want further details, yes.
Have you considered weighted arguments?
So there's been many extensions in terms of use of computational framework. Some of them are more towards the probabilistic side. Some of them are more on the degree of belief on arguments. Some of them are actually looking at the degree of belief on an attack. So whether an attack between two arguments is strong enough. There has been several extensions in this direction, studying properties, theoretical properties. In terms of actual implementation, we look a little inside the notion of trust for information, and we built on top of some probabilistic graphs, and that is what I can implement in CS basis. I'm not aware of many other approaches implemented for them, but in terms of theoretical advancement, there are plenty of other frameworks that are pursuing some way of implementation. Do you have anything specific in mind? Or?
So I'm wondering about strategic aspects of this. But what I mean is this: when it says an argument in natural language, usually it's between, let's say, two people, and time is involved and strategy is involved. So we don't have this argumentation graph is a static object. It seems to me that when we're building an argument, I might hold some information